These are the answers to the January 2016 Regents exam short response questions. In question number 25, they give you this table. They want to know whether the table is linear or whether it is exponential. The easiest way to figure out if it's linear or exponential is to do a linear regression and an exponential regression and see which one is closest to 1 or -1. So you're going to type these numbers into your L1. You're going to type these numbers into your L2. Stat, calc, number 4, linear regression. When you do your linear regression, you see that it is R value of equal to -1. A R value for linear regression of -1 means that it is a strong negative correlation. It is definitely 100% linear. So you had to say that it was linear. You could also say that it's linear because it decreases by the same amount, which is 2.5 each time. We go from 10 to 7.5 to 5 to 2.5 to 0. So because it's decreasing by the same amount each time, it would be a linear function. You could also say that it would be increasing by the same amount each time if it was a different chart. It has a constant rate of change. That could be another reason. Or you went and you graph these points. When you graph those points, you see that it forms a straight line, all right, not a curved line, which would be exponential. So 1 point for linear, 1 point for your explanation. You did not have to say more than one of these reasons, just one of them is perfectly fine. In question number 26, Marcel claims that the graph below represents a function. State whether Marcel is correct, justify your answer. So this is not a function. You had to say no, that it is not a function. And you could say it for a couple different reasons. Right here at x equals 2, you can see that there are 2 points directly above each other. Since there are 2 points directly above each other, it fails the vertical line test. You could also say that one x value, that the x value of 2, has 2 different y values. In a function, each x value only has 1 y value. So no is worth 1 point and the explanation is worth 1 point. In question number 27, you need to solve the equation for y. Well, that means you need to get the y all by itself. To get the y all by itself, the first thing that you should do is y minus 3 squared. That's really y minus 3 times y minus 3. You want to do FOIL right there. When you do that, you get y squared minus 6y plus 9. And it still equals all that. Now I could, to get it set equal to 0 to solve it, I would subtract 4y from both sides, so these cancel out, and add 12 to both sides, so the negative minus 12 cancels out. That gets me my 0 on the right-hand side. Now I have a trinomial. Now when you get it down to this point, you could use the quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, or you could just do reverse FOIL. If you do reverse FOIL, what times what is 21? That adds up to -10. It would be -7 times -3. Draw your line down the middle, set both sides equal to 0, and solve. You get 3 and 7 as your answers. If you use the quadratic formula, this would be your work. Square root of 16 is 4. So you'd have 10 plus 4 over 2 and 10 minus 4 over 2. Again, you get 7 and 3 as your answers. You could do completing the square. I highly doubt that people would do that, however. So 1 point for each of those answers. As long as you got it down to this trinomial equals 0, you would at least get 1 point. In question number 28, during which years did the temperature variation change the most per unit of time? Explain how you determined your answer. So they want to know which one has the rate of change that would be the highest, all right? Now, you have to be careful because highest is sort of the absolute value of that, whether it goes down or whether it goes up. You're looking for the biggest number because that would be the biggest change. So in between 1960 and 1965, we go down 0.15 and over 5 years. So it decreased 0.15 in 5 years. If we did it in between any of these points, it's going up 0.1 over 5 years. So that change of 0.15 compared to a change of 0.1 is bigger, all right? It's the steepest slope on your graph. So the next highest would be a 0.1 change over 5 years compared to a 0.15 change over the 5 years. So in between here and here is your biggest change. So 1 point for the answer of 1960 to 1965, and 1 point for your explanation that it's the steepest slope, or you found that it was 0.15 in 5 years. In question number 29, the cost of belonging to the gym is modeled by that equation. State the meaning of the slope and state the meaning of the y-intercept. So the meaning of the slope, notice that the 50 is in front of the m, where m is the number of months. That means the slope means that it's $50 per month. It's the cost per month, or how much is being charged per month. The y-intercept is the plus or minus after the m. So the y-intercept of plus 79.50, that's going to be some one-time fee. All right, that's probably the initial sign-up fee. So it's $50 a month plus some other sort of fee, which is probably like a sign-up fee. 1 point for talking about what the slope is, 1 point for talking about what the y-intercept is. In question number 30, a class surveyed some students during one lunch period about what kind of TV programs they like. So we have males and females, we have comedy and drama. The very first thing that I would do is find your totals. Add the rows going across, add the columns going down. Based on the sample, predict how many of the school's 351 males would prefer comedy. So what we have to do first is sort of a tricky type question. We have to look at the males, what percentage of males prefer comedy to begin with. So there are 105 males. 70 of them prefer comedy out of the 105. So that means 2/3 or 66.6% of the males in the survey prefer comedy. But now you want to extrapolate that data and figure out that was just for 195 people surveyed. You want to know, or sorry, out of 105 males surveyed, you want to know how many of the 351 males surveyed would like that. So that rate is going to carry down to here. We need to figure out what 2/3 or 66.6 repeating percent of the 351 males would be. Well, you multiply those two numbers together, you get 234. So you get 1 point for figuring out the percentage, the 66.6% or 2/3, and then 1 point for extrapolating that data to be 234 students. You could have also done a proportion, X over 351. So the number of males out of 351 who like comedy equals 70 out of the 105 surveyed. Cross multiply, divide, you get that same amount. In question number 31, sort of a confusing question here, and there are multiple answers. The work over to the left and the work over to the right, two totally different answers, all right? There's actually a third answer down here as well. So they want you to solve for X in terms of A and B. So that means we need to get the X all by itself. Well, when we start this one off, to get the X all by itself, I'm going to do this right-hand side one first. To get the X all by itself, I would distribute and distribute to get rid of the parentheses. Now I want to get the X's all on one side of the equal sign. If you decide to get the X's over to the left-hand side, I need to get rid of this minus 3b by doing plus 3b and plus 3b. And then I would have to subtract AX from both sides. You can't do BX minus AX, all right? Those are different letters. So BX minus AX just stays BX minus AX, and that is greater than or equal to 10b. Now, to get the X all by itself, I actually have to factor out and take out the greatest common factor between these two terms. So I can take out an X, I'm left with B minus A inside. Well, that's X times that B minus A. So to get the X all by itself, I would have to divide by B minus A and B minus A. Those would cancel out. So now I have 10B divided by B minus A. Now, remember that when you divide by a negative, you have to flip the sign. It tells you in the original problem that A is bigger than B. So no matter what number we do, B minus A, the B is going to be the smaller number, A is going to be the bigger number. So we're actually divided by a negative number here. Since we're dividing by a negative, we have to flip the sign. That's what makes this one tricky. So this would be x is less than or equal to 10b divided by b minus a. That's your answer. Totally different way to do it would be to get all the letters onto the right-hand side. We have to distribute and distribute first, and then I would subtract bx from both sides and subtract 7b from both sides. You end up with this. Again, when you end up with ax minus bx, you can't subtract those two. You have to factor out the greatest common factor. So we factor out the x, and then we divide by the a minus b on both sides. You get this as your answer. They really want you to flip it around to have the x come first. Notice here we have a minus b. That's a bigger number minus a smaller number. That's going to give you a positive number. So we don't need to flip the sign because of that. We flip the sign because we flip the whole inequality statement around. So this would be a fine answer as well. If you just have one mistake somewhere, you would get 1 out of 2. This one's sort of hard to grade on your own, but if you only have one mistake somewhere, like an inequality sign or something like that, that would be 1 out of 2. In question number 32, another 2-point question, we have Jacob and Jessica, and they come up with equations for growth of dandelions. Jacob has this equation. Jessica has this equation. It says calculate the number of dandelions that Jacob and Jessica will each have after 5 weeks. So we want to take and sub into this equation of 5 and take and sub into this equation of 5. When we do that, we get that both Jacob and Jessica each have 256. You have to show for each one individually. All right. Based on the growth from both functions, explain why the relationship between the f of t and the g of t. Well, notice that they are equal. No matter what equation you sub, or what number of dandelions you sub in there, or what number of weeks rather that you sub in there, you are going to get equal answers. So 1 point for finding 256 and 256, 1 point for saying that they are equal no matter what number of weeks you sub in. Now we start with our 4-point questions. We have this equation equals the height of an object above the ground after a certain number of seconds. Determine the number of seconds it takes to reach its max. All right, so we want to find the max. When we go to find the max and you go to graph that, all right, this is what the graph looks like. Your max is right here. Remember, you can do second calc and then the maximum. So the max point is 144. So that means the number of seconds that it takes is 2 because the time always goes across the bottom. So the time is at 2 seconds. You could either show the graph and say that you're looking at the graph, or we can take a 2, sub it in for the t, and show that it reaches a max of 144. State the time interval in seconds during which the height decreases. Explain your reasoning. Well, you can either look at the table or you can look at the graph and see that the graph is going down from 2 seconds to 5 seconds. At 5 seconds, it reaches 0. All right, so it's in between 2 and 5 seconds. 2 points for this top part, 2 points for this bottom part, and we move on to 34. Fred's teacher gave the class a quadratic function. There it is. State 2 different methods that you could use for solving it. It doesn't say in this first part what is the answer. It just says, how would you get the answer? Well, there's 4 different ways that you could do it. You could graph the equation and look at the zeros or x-intercepts. You could use the quadratic formula. You could do completing the square, or you could factor the trinomial, which is also called reverse FOIL. So those, you just have to say 2 out of 4 of those. In part B, it says solve it to the nearest 10th. I would use the quadratic formula. Right? When you use the quadratic formula, this is your A value of 4, your B value of 16, your C value of 9. Sub those in, you get negative 0.7 and negative 3.3 when you round to the nearest 10th. You could graph it and find the x-intercepts, all right, of negative 3.3 and negative 7, which are your zeros. 2 points for the top part, 2 points for the bottom part. 1 point for each of these in the top part, 1 point for each of the answers in the bottom part. In question number 35, Erica is a manager. She collected data on the high temperature and coffee sales from 9 different days. State the linear regression. So stat calc number 4, linear regression, after you type these into your L1 and into your L2. So state the linear regression around all values to the nearest integer. Because it says the linear regression of f of t, you have to have f of t equals, because to make it a function, you have to have that equals. If you just said y equals, or if you didn't have the f of t equals at all, and you just put the negative 58t plus 6,182, you would only get 1 out of 2 points. So that's your linear regression. That's worth 2 points. State the correlation coefficient, the R value, rounded to the nearest hundredth. Rounded to the nearest hundredth. So again, you want to do stat calc linear regression and look at your R value. It ends up being negative 0.94 to the nearest hundredth. Then they want to know, does that indicate a strong regression, and why? Yes, it does. It indicates strong because it's very, very close to -1. So you get 2 points for your equation up here. You get 1 point for stating the R value and 1 point for saying that it's close to -1. In number 36, this is a hard question. A contractor has 48 meters of fencing to use as a perimeter of a rectangle. And it says that the area of that rectangle is 108. So I drew a rectangle and I said, these are my X's, these are my Y's. Because you know, in a rectangle, the left and right are the same, the top and bottom are the same. To find the perimeter of anything, you add up all 4 sides. So I could do X plus Y plus Y. That gives me 2X plus 2Y equals 48 for my perimeter. Well, if I go to put it in terms of Y, all right, I'm going to subtract 2X from both sides, and then I'm going to divide by 2's. I get Y equals 24 minus X. So I know that these 2 sides are 24 minus X and 24 minus X. To find the area, all right, I multiply the one side times the other side. So X times 24 minus X, which is my Y, equals my total area of 108. When I go to distribute, I get 24x minus x squared. And now I need to get it set equal to 0. So I'm going to do minus 24x and minus x squared. I get this trinomial. This is where you have your choice. You could either do reverse FOIL. What times what is 108? That adds up to -24, or use the quadratic formula. Either one. If you do reverse FOIL, it's -6 times -18. Draw your line down the middle, set both sides equal to 0, and solve. You get 6 and 18. If you use the quadratic formula, 1 is your A, -24 is your B, and 108 is your C. Crank through the quadratic formula, you get 18 and 2, or 18 and 6 rather. So this is a 4-point question. It's sort of hard to explain without looking at your individual question what gets partial credit. But let's say that getting 18 is worth 1 point, getting 6 is worth 1 point. If you knew to multiply to find the area, and you multiplied your 2 sides together, I'd say that's worth 1 point. And if you rearrange for Y equals, I'd say that was worth 1 point. Number 37 is our last question. It is a 6-point question. All right, so in this question, it says in a theater, you have 200 seats. Adult tickets cost $12.50. Children's tickets cost $6.25. The goal is to sell at least, remember, you have to be at least 16 years old to drive a car. You could be equal to 16 or more than 16. So they want to sell at least greater than or equal to $1,500 worth of tickets. Write a system of linear equations that can be used to find the tickets. So adult tickets, my X, plus children's tickets, my Y, that's what they tell you to specifically use. So if you used A and C, you would not get full credit for the problem, is less than or equal to 200, because there's 200 total seats in the theater. So the adult plus the children has to be less than or equal to 200. Then we have $12.50 or 12.5 times the cost of a adult ticket plus $6.25 times the cost of a children's ticket. And that has to be greater than or equal to, because their goal is 12, at least $1,500 worth. So greater than or equal to 1,500. 1 point for this equation, 1 point for this equation. So that's the top part. Now it says graph the solution to the system of inequalities on the axes on the next page. Label the solution with an S. In order to graph both of these, we need to rearrange for y equals. So to get this y all by itself, I would subtract by x and subtract by x. To get the y all by itself, I'd subtract by 12.5x and then divide by 6.25x. So here's my two equations. I'm going to type those into my y equals, and I'm going to graph them. Here's my points. Both of them are solid lines because of the or equals. On this one, we have greater than, so we're shading above. This one is less than, so we're shading below. You're graphing your solution set with an S. So in this double shaded area right here in this little triangle, you have to put the letter S somewhere. Those are your answers. So you get 1 point for graphing this one correctly, 1 point for graphing this one correctly, 1 point for your solution. So we're up to 5 points so far. Your 6th point comes from the last part. Marta claims that selling 30 adult and 80 children's tickets would result in meeting the cinema's goal. Is she correct or incorrect based on the graphs? 30 adult, so go over to 30, up to 80. All right, so 30, 80 would be right here. Is that in the double shaded area? No, it is not. So that does not, she is incorrect. Those coordinates are not in the solution set. So again, 1 point for this equation, 1 point for this equation, 1 point for a correct graph here, 1 point for a correct graph here, 1 point for labeling the solution set with an S, 1 point for saying that she's incorrect and it is not in the solution set. Here's what your scores are. So if you go through and add them up, this is what your score ends up being.